we could not do what we do without you, so thank you. It is my pleasure to introduce Larry Diamond, who is the Senior Fellow at the Hoover Institution and is the Freeman Spogli Institute for International Studies. For more than 6 years, he has directed FSI's Center on Democracy, Development, and the Rule of Law, and he continues to lead its programs on liberation technology, Arab reform and democracy in Taiwan. Larry is the founding co-editor of the Journal of Democracy and also serves as senior consultant at the International Forum for Democratic Studies of the National Endowment for Democracy. His sixth and most recent book, In Search of Democracy, explores the challenges confronting democracy and democracy promotion, gathering together 3 decades of his work on democratic development, particularly in Africa and Asia. He has edited or co-edited more than 40 books on democratic development around the world. Larry also serves as the Peter E. Haas Faculty Director of the Haas Center for Public Service at Stanford. In this role, Larry has been instrumental in the development and implementation of Cardinal Service, something we'll spend some time talking about today, an important new initiative which you have all been instrumental in supporting through your support of the Stanford Fund, and has helped to underwrite Cardinal Service. We'll start today by speaking a bit about Cardinal Service, but then also, time permitting, talking more broadly about some of Larry's work, including his research in democratic development, and including how Stanford is continuing to involve and engage undergraduates around this issue. Larry, thank you very much for being here and joining us on the call. Delighted to have you.
Well, Mike, thank you for the generous introduction, but most of all, thank you for everything you've done for Stanford and for helping to mobilize your class to support Stanford. And I do really want to thank everyone on the call who supported the Stanford Fund through the President's Fund. As we'll talk about more, this is very personal to us at the Haas Center for Public Service because President's Fund support has really been critical to the launch of this initiative, Cardinal Service. And I might say as well that more generally, President Hennessy and the Provost as well have been very generous supporters of the Haas Center for Public Service and have enabled us to develop and gestate the programs that have matured into this very significant initiative called Cardinal Service. I might say as well a couple things, Mike. One is that I am a Stanford alum, and it's like a major. I'm not able to contribute quite at the level as the people on this call, but I'm kind of halfway there in some instances. You know, it's very, very meaningful to me as a Stanford alum to be able both to contribute my time and energy and a little bit my imagination to the development of these programs, but also, you know, financially to support what Stanford does. I do know people ask, I do know alums ask, I do know that somebody who is on our call or was planning to be here asked, why should I support a rich university like Stanford University? It's one of the most challenging questions we get. And the answer is, you know, to me personally, in terms of why I do it, not so that you can support a rich university. It's so that you can support these amazing young people who are not just going to go out and be the next generation who will do impactful things in various sectors, whether it's health, education, business, law, the environment, government, but who want to do things now and prepare for careers to do things to change the world and make the world a better place. So for all of you on the call who were there at any of the Stanford Challenge events that had that great video that ended with one of our illustrious alumni, Johnny Dorsey, saying, you know, if we can mobilize the support, we really can. We, Stanford, and all of the students and faculty and staff and alumni who intersect, we really can change the world. That's what it's about.
That's great. Thank you, Larry. So you've been at Stanford for 30 years. And we're talking about engagement. So as you think about student interest in engaging with local and global communities, how have you seen that change over the last 30 years?
So basically what I've seen change is two things. Number one, extraordinary growth, extraordinary, demonstrable, and now in terms of what we're doing at the Haas Center, measurable growth in student appetite for, and really I will say demand for, in terms of the market sense, opportunities to serve. I have never seen, in the 30 years I've been here on the research and teaching staff of the university, the level of student passion for and I'd say intelligently informed interest in public service opportunities, opportunities to engage with and support and add something to local communities during the academic year while they're doing their academics and all the other extracurricular things they do, but in particular, explosive growth in student desire for summer opportunities, what we're calling Cardinal Quarter, full-time, quarter-long, that means at least 8 to 9 weeks, opportunities to have some kind of internship with the community or public service dimension to them. That's the first thing. The second thing, and I know this is also speaking to a question that I think several people have in their minds is, okay, let's be honest, there's been a dramatic gravitation in majors on campus toward engineering in general, computer science more specifically, and sciences and engineering more broadly. And so we recognize that as an evolution in the academic concentration or focus of what Stanford students are doing with their undergraduate careers. But the other big change I've seen is the way science, engineering, and computer science students, more specifically, are wanting to take the scientific and technical knowledge and backgrounds that they're getting and give back to communities with that specialized training. We didn't see that nearly as much some years ago. Maybe we weren't doing enough to cultivate it or create opportunities for it, but that's explosive as well. And so they're able to take the training they're getting and do practical and valuable things to make contributions to communities now. And then, in addition, I should say that it's not only the students who have exploding interest in and engagement with these issues. We've seen a lot of growth in faculty as well. So we now have 250 faculty and staff from across campus who've signed on as Cardinal Service Connectors to support our efforts. And we have gone, in the space of 1 year, with the first-year launch of Cardinal Service, from starting at this initiative in 2015, 78 courses that Stanford faculty were teaching over the year that we're calling Cardinal courses because they're community-engaged learning courses. They add on an element of community engagement or public service activity to the traditional course. We went from 78, our goal was to get to 150 courses in a 5-year period. We're ending this academic year with 131 courses already. Now, we've got much more staff capacity to do that, but that tells you something about how the faculty are signing on.
That's terrific. The, one thing is the Cardinal Quarter, and at the last President's Fund reception, John Hennessy mentioned that one of the seminal experiences for a lot of undergraduates is the quarter abroad and taking advantage of that program. And his vision of the Cardinal Quarter was it could be that meaningful to the undergraduate experience. How do you see the impact, really, of the Cardinal Quarter coming along?
So the impact is that, first of all, we need to stress there are many ways to do public service, okay? Not everyone will feel that they've got the space in their undergraduate career to do a full-time public service internship. many students decide that the best way that they can participate in Cardinal Service is by taking some of these community-engaged learning courses or Cardinal courses, or maybe incrementally doing some public service engagement over the course of the year we can talk about. But when you immerse yourself in a specific organization or institution for 9 weeks full-time, that has an intensive, and we have learned, not infrequently life-changing impact that is unlike anything else, but can be comparable in some ways to spending a quarter abroad in an intensive, immersive, full-time experience. And sometimes the Cardinal Service opportunities are abroad in think tanks, NGOs, community organizations, UN-affiliated agencies in different countries around the world. It looks like we've got at least a dozen students going to Ecuador alone this summer, some of them for volunteers in Latin America. I think we have several dozen students going to Africa this summer. We're talking to alumni in India about rapidly growing the number of public service opportunities in India. We have a few now. When students go to places like this, and if there's a language component to it, the ones we're sending to Latin America are obviously reasonably fluent in Spanish. Some of them are highly fluent in Spanish. Some of them in Latin America or in Africa will be either returning to a continent that they had engaged as an overseas studies campus participant in Cape Town or, say, Santiago. Some of them are just continuing on after a spring in that situation. And so you see the experience of being in another sitting, whether it's an inner city, whether it's Washington, D.C., whether it's South Africa or Ghana or Ecuador or, Chile or wherever. It has a transformative impact for our students. And when they can engage in the work of an organization that's trying to do good in the world, whether it's relieve hunger or, save the whales or improve the functioning of our national parks or, legal services in East Palo Alto or health care to underserved communities, it's just their eyes and minds open up to, A, what careers could look like in the nonprofit sector and how satisfying they can be, or B, maybe they'll go the route of the for-profit sector or some other kind of work, but want to keep engaging in this kind of work on a volunteer basis over the arc of their careers.
Yeah, terrific. So one of the, a skeptic would say one of the challenges in this area is that and I'm talking about the challenge of a community engagement program, is that it will feel like maybe just another program within the university, or it'll feel very separate from the core academic experience. So could you talk a little bit about what you're doing to counter that skeptical view?
So we have a very strong commitment, generally at Stanford and within the Haas Center for Public Service, to integrate these service experiences with the academic learning experience of students as students. We do that in a number of ways. First of all, as I said, we're rapidly growing the number of community-engaged learning courses. The courses themselves have a public service or community engagement component, but they're often launching pads for quarter-long Cardinal Quarter public service internships. We've got 6 directors of community-engaged learning at the Haas Center, people with PhDs in academic disciplines who are coordinating our classes in these realms, service learning classes, and also establishing relationships with community partners that have an academic component to them and that can help expand what we do. We have specialists in health in education, in the environment, in engineering, and particularly computer science, in human rights, and through partnership with the Comparative Center for Race and Ethnicity in issues related to identity. And students, therefore, can link the coursework they're doing to the public service they want to do, both through Cardinal Quarter and through the courses. We have an honors program. The public service honors program enables students to do an honors thesis in any either academic department or interdepartmental program on campus, and if it has a public service component, to interact with other students and think about how the service element relates to their academic element. And we are getting tremendous buy-in from the faculty who have caught the spirit that was in the seminal report, the Study of Undergraduate Education at Stanford, that noted that for the 21st century, in education shouldn't just be in the ivory tower experience. It's got to reach out and engage the world around us and the challenges that we think great universities like Stanford are distinctively positioned to address and relieve.
Right. Just given the audience we have on the phone here, mainly alumni, obviously, I'm just curious for your thoughts on alumni engagement and the right way that alumni could be thinking about this if they're excited about it and want to get involved.
Well, we're drawing in more alumni as participants and connectors themselves for the Cardinal Service Initiative. There are a number of things they can do. First of all, they can visit our website at the Haas Center, and we have a URL address we can provide where they, if they want to, can sign up to be alumni connectors for Cardinal Service. They can support students serving in where they live, in their city, helping them provide orientation. Students are always welcome to have a meal with alumni, I can tell you that. I think the alumni know that. Sometimes students need help with housing in any particular city where we might be sending them, and alumni might be able to help them with leads on that, or even connections to people who might be able to offer a room or rent a room at a affordable price. We have a particular website for students called Hot Leads, where students who get portable fellowships, it's not targeted at one location, but it's they choose the organization they want to have an internship at, and then they compete for that in a fellowship opportunity. And so if our alumni know of hot leads for service opportunities that they think could be outstanding opportunities for public service, we would love to know about those. And then finally, obviously, through support of the President's Fund, our alumni on this call have already offered some support to Cardinal Service, and if any of them want to do more to include Cardinal Service in their philanthropy plans for Stanford University, we would welcome that as well.
Terrific. I was going to pivot away now from Cardinal Service for a moment and hit a few other topics, unless there's anything you feel like we missed on Cardinal Service you'd like to throw out there.
I think the only other thing is that we have the winds that are back. Not only are the winds of freedom blowing at Stanford, but the winds of public service are blowing at Stanford. I've just never seen anything like it in my 30 years here. It's being recognized around the country that Stanford is a leader in this field. And to go back to President Hennessy's vision, we think we're now on a trajectory where 5 years from now, 10 years from now, these students are going to graduate and they're going to come back and say, oh, what did you do for your Cardinal Service?
That's great. That's terrific. So you are teaching, you have taught, and I think, again, this fall are teaching a Thinking Matters course, which is, for those who don't know, an introductory course designed really to be taken by freshmen early in their Stanford undergraduate experience. And so I think that puts you in a pretty unique position to talk about the Stanford freshmen and just the overall state of the Stanford freshmen and the kids that are coming in, and would love your perspective on that.
So they are very, very concerned about the world, and I'd say with each passing year, we see classes that are more engaged with the world and more interested in public service. One of the things that strikes me is that the incoming freshmen in the past few years have had much more public service experience, initiative, even entrepreneurship in the public service or social entrepreneurship sense than incoming students used to have, let's say. So that is a trend. They're very politically aware and alert now. My course is a course about democracy. It's partly about American democracy, and so obviously they're on fire about that, and we're in a year where it's logical that they would be highly motivated about that. I don't want to get too political, but people can draw the extrapolations. The other thing I want to say is, President Hennessy had a vision, which has not been possible for us to implement, of going to need-blind international admissions. We're not in a financial position yet as a university to do that, but we are getting more and more international undergraduates. So I think each freshman class has a higher proportion of international students than the previous one. It's been a modest incremental increase, but you can see the trend. And one of the things that has struck me the most is that there is an extraordinary percentage of international undergraduates who are interested in public service and have been doing it. And they're just amazing individuals. And in many cases, they're going to go back to their countries and be extraordinary agents of change and public service leadership.
Great, thank you. So I'm going to give you one last question, then we're going to turn to audience questions here. And, but this is the classic moderator lob-job question for us, so let me throw it out there. So since you've been here, you've been involved in many areas of Stanford, from FSI to the Hoover Institute. And so, what is on your mind these days? What issues are keeping you up at night? And what role do you see Stanford playing in those issues? Much more broadly.
Well, I'm a specialist on democracy in the United States and globally. So one thing that's keeping me up at night now, we could talk about it more, is that I think after, several decades of extraordinary and unprecedented expansion, we've been in a global recession of freedom and democracy in the world. It's a mild recession, but it's gathering steam. You look at what's happening, in Turkey with President Erdogan, in Russia with Putin, China with Xi Jinping. A very authoritarian leader was just elected president of the Philippines. It's a trend that we need to worry about. And there's a growing amount of public dissatisfaction with corruption and the performance of governance institutions around the world. So, one of the places where we are sending a lot of students over the years is centers and institutions that are working on accountability, transparency in government, budget monitoring, corruption control, that sort of thing. Secondly, there's nothing that keeps me up at night, at least in the metaphorical sense, more than climate change. And of course, we can now note that we've got one of the leaders in the study of climate change globally, Chris Field, who's just been named the new director of the Woods Institute. It's a great appointment. This is the single biggest policy or collective challenge that our students will need to wrestle with over the course of their lifetimes. And Stanford is a leader in this field, and, we need to connect the environmental science side of what we're doing with the governance side of what we're doing, because if we can't turn the corner on better public policies to address this in a timely fashion, you know, I fear for the world that our kids are going to be growing up in.
Thank you. That's great. We're going to move to the audience questions now, and before I do that, just a reminder to everyone that you can submit the questions through the WebEx link that you got with the email that was sent out, and then we will be taking those up. So the first question is from Pamela King, and her question is, what do you perceive to be the major areas of student growth or formation outside the classroom? As a professor in higher education, I hear more of schools talking about formation, the importance of moral character, civic and spiritual development. I'm interested to hear what you feel like the role of Stanford is in these regards and how universities can most effectively shape their students to become global citizens.
Well, I'd like to thank Pamela for the question and for the use of the words moral and character along with civic. So, Pamela, one of the things I want to say to you and your fellow alumni on the call is that we take this challenge extremely seriously at the Haas Center and throughout the whole Cardinal Service Initiative. If young people don't approach public service and community engagement with a strong sense of ethical reflection and orientation, you know, it cannot go very well, and it can do some harm maybe as well as some good. And so we are a leader at the Haas Center nationally and internationally for having developed, refined, and updated and improved, I think, over time, a set of principles of ethical and effective public service. And if you just Google Haas Center Principles of Ethical and Effective Public Service, you'll get to the statement, which many organizations and campuses around the world have been adapting. It's important that they understand they're actually not God's gift to the world yet entirely, that they have a lot to learn from this, and that they approach the fellowship with a degree of humility, understand that preparation is very important, that this is a reciprocal relationship in which everybody's going to benefit, and if there isn't reciprocal benefit, it isn't right. It can't only be a one-way relationship. So preparation and ethical reflection before and after any fellowship experience is very important. I just want to say, you know, just so it doesn't seem like I'm entirely self-serving here, I think that it's very important for every undergraduate to have engagement with moral and ethical issues in a systematic and ongoing way during their undergraduate education. I think the McCoy Family Center for Ethics and Society is an extremely important initiative, the work that Rob Reich and Deborah Satz and others have done through this center. We bring speakers to campus through that center, through the Haas Center and our distinguished visitor program, who are constantly prompting students, challenging students, helping students to reflect on ethical issues. We have faculty who are taking students to the theater, whether it's Shakespeare or modern theater, it's infused with moral and ethical challenges. I'm very excited that we've got 2 plays coming to the Curran Theater in San Francisco this next season that were produced by 2 of our illustrious alumni, Scott and Molly Forstall, who've been very supportive of Stanford, that both are just deeply engaged with ethical and moral issues, one called Fun House, the other that's been playing on Broadway, Eclipsed, and we're going to kind of engage those theatrical productions. So there's all sorts of ways that we're taking this challenge seriously.
That's great. Next question is a follow-up on something you said a little earlier, which is you mentioned that you see more students from tech backgrounds looking to serve. Mm-hmm. What do you see Stanford doing to encourage students to choose careers, emphasis on career, not just volunteer or part-time service, outside of tech and in things like government or civic service?
Great question. So we've got 4 elements of Cardinal service. I've spoken about Cardinal Quarter, Cardinal courses. We have Cardinal Commitment, which is the incremental way that students can devote part of each week to tutoring in East Palo Alto. We have a program called, that's, I think, a couple decades old now, East Palo Alto Tennyson Tutoring, where the two are combined. We've got students who've been working to help serve underserved communities in terms of health care in the surrounding area of Stanford. And then we have Cardinal Careers, where we are working very hard, first of all, to expose Stanford undergraduates to a broader range of career opportunities in the not-for-profit sector and in a rapidly emerging sector that I am very excited about, that I think is going to be at the leading edge of solving many of the world's problems in the next several decades, and that's what we call the 4th sector of social benefit companies, companies that are in the realm of social entrepreneurship that are combining a for-profit logic and a larger collective social purpose that doesn't ignore profit and financial sustainability, but that is not purely engaged in profit maximization. So we have a job fair every October now. In a few months, we'll be holding our 3rd annual one, where we bring philanthropies, non-governmental organizations, social ventures of various kinds together into a room. It's requiring an increasingly big room where several hundred students come and have a career fair that speaks to them and their interest in nonprofit or 4th sector career paths. We're embarked as part of Cardinal Careers on a plan to offer counseling to these students in an individual way to help them identify possible career paths. And this is an area where I think alumni can actually play a really big role in mentoring our students on, A, the possibilities for careers of public service, whether in government or non-governmental work or philanthropies or the 4th sector, and also how they can volunteer their time for boards of nonprofits or for more high-impact volunteer service. Then we are going to be placing, with the support of the chairman of the Board of Trustees, Steve Denning, a Stanford student in the Partnership for Public Service every year for a 2-year fellowship to work on helping to recruit Stanford students and students around the country to careers in government service. We have now about 7 or 8 postgraduate fellowships, the Tom Ford Fellowships in Philanthropy, the John Gardner Fellowships, and 1 or 2 international public service fellowships where graduating seniors can have a year-long work experience in the nonprofit sector that may then propel them to careers in that direction.
Okay, great. Next question is from Arjan Mathur, I think, and really touches on something you mentioned earlier, but give me a chance to go back and emphasize it. So as an expert on foreign aid and one who has studied the dire state of many parts of the world, do you believe it is ethical to donate money to Stanford, an institution that has no additional financial need, when that same money could go to benefiting foreign institutions with significant more need of it?
So I would say a couple of things here. One, I don't think it's either or. I think a lot of individuals and organizations who engage in philanthropy do a lot of both. And certainly these organizations abroad have significant and crying financial and material and technical needs. But I don't think it's right to say that Stanford has no more need for support the institution is trying to do more in a variety of ways, and we can't do more. I mean, the funds we have are largely committed, and if we want to do more, we need to raise new funding to do more. I know this from intense personal experience, having led two institutions. There's a lot of, I think, misconception out there in the world, less so, much less so among Stanford alumni than the general world, that this university has an X billion-dollar endowment bigger than the gross national product of a number of small countries. Why do we need any more money? Now, I will say something else that I think is extremely important. If you want to help an organization in need, out there doing good for humanity, if you want to help a country in need that's a lower income country, and if you're a Stanford alumni, a member of the Stanford alumni, what a cool way to touch multiple bases by investing in a Cardinal Quarter or a Cardinal Quarter abroad. I'll give you an example, very personal to me. I've been working for 20 years with a governance institute in Ghana called the Ghana Center for Democratic Development. This is an organization that is really trying to fight corruption, improve public policy, election monitoring, budget monitoring, of a country that is really on the cusp of making it in sub-Saharan Africa. And there aren't many that are on the cusp of launching into middle-income status. And, you know, for more than 8 or 10 years now, we've been sending a Stanford undergraduate, sometimes two. This year we're sending two, to the Ghana Center in Accra to work for a summer with this organization. I have been to this center a number of years, and the people who work at this center, particularly the executive director, I know extremely well. And I can tell you two things about this center. Number one, it isn't rolling in money. It gets a lot of support from the international donor community, but the road to this center, buckle your seatbelt in order to even get to the driveway of this center, and it's in the capital city. And number two, I know from intimate personal experience that the students we send there make a material contribution that is a measurable, impactful contribution to the work of this center. This isn't charity on their part to us. They wouldn't be taking our student fellows unless they felt they were being helped by it. So this is a way you can do everything at once.
Yeah, that's great. This is a way we talk about this as giving, don't think of it as giving to Stanford, it's giving through Stanford.
Yeah.
That's a great example of that idea. We've got time for a couple more questions. So one is from Thomas Dixon, which is, what is the role of women in development and democracy in societies that are traditionally patriarchal, particularly in the Middle East, including Iran, and how can it be promoted over the near and medium term?
Well, first of all, it's not just the Middle East. It's all over the world that we have patriarchy and gender inequality. And it's worse in some places, and, you know, it's getting better in others. But it's not just the Middle East. If you look at the data, for example, not to pick on this region, but look at the data from South Asia on inequality and access to education, and it's just staggering. So I can tell you this, there is no investment you can make in a lower income country that will have a higher yield in terms of the improvement in human well-being and the economic takeoff of the country than to educate girls, period, full stop. Anybody at the World Bank, anybody in any development organization will tell you that. Close the gender gap in education and educate girls. And if we had more time, I could explain all the reasons why. But when they become mothers, their kids will be healthier. They'll see that their kids stay in school more. They will have more earning potential. They'll also have fewer children, and their children will live longer, and so many more reasons I can mention. And we've got students who are doing that. We've got students here, right here in East Palo Alto. We've got students in India who are taking, and some of them are girls, young women, taking their computer science skills and teaching girls around the world, in the inner city, wherever it might be, to code. What a wonderful thing.
That's great, great story. Next question is about activism on campus.
Yeah.
So, how do you see the increase in activism, both on campus and off, impacting how students interact with programs like Cardinal Service? And here's kind of the clarification. Are they more or less inclined to participate in programs organized by the institution? And so, is it, and an example, kind of a reference to Black Lives Matter, but I think there's a little bit of establishment politics in here too. Is the university as an institution able to organize and help these conversations along, or no, or is that activism being directed in some other way?
So let me say a couple things. First of all, yes, our students are intensely motivated by social justice concerns. This propels them into various forms and pathways of public service, and we at the Haas Center believe that activism, properly structured and motivated, with respect for, the law and the rules, can be an important avenue of community engagement and public service. But that isn't all that they do. I know for a fact that students who are involved in Black Lives Matter, students who wanted the university to divest from fossil fuels, students who protest against sexual assault on campuses around the United States. Stanford has been singled out this week, but we know it's a national problem, are deeply involved in our fellowship program. They participate in our public service leadership program. They don't make a distinction between institutional opportunities and, maybe activism that they want to put out there on the social media or whatever it might be. Now, I wish everybody on this phone call could be looking at the printout I asked for today, which is the roughly 400 students that are going to do Cardinal Quarter summer opportunities this year. And just let me read you some of the ones that are being sponsored just by the Comparative Center for Studies in Race and Ethnicity. Community Legal Services of East Palo Alto, La Mesa Verde at Sacred Heart Community Center, Peace Tones, Native Mentorship in Public Health, Daly City Youth Health Center, Asian Americans for Community Involvement. I mean, it's all over.
So our last question, which just came in, actually relates exactly to the list you were just reading, which is how are the service opportunities selected by students, by faculty, or both? And what about the security concerns in some parts of the world? How are you balancing those questions?
Okay, so let's first talk about selection. We've got multiple ways that Cardinal Quarter, particularly let's say now summer fellowships, materialize. We have a number of partners. So first of all, some of them are offered directly through the Haas Center. And among the ones offered directly through the Haas Center, some of them are in a fellowship competition where the students identify the fellowship and then they compete with that fellowship. Others are offered through direct placements that we've established. A number of them happen through our student organizational partners, particularly Stanford in Government has something like 65 or 70 Cardinal Quarter placements this summer. Some of them are fixed placements. Some of them are, again, you bring the fellowship to compete for the Stanford in Government Stipends Fellowship. Project Dosti places students in India, volunteers in Latin America. Students for a Sustainable World, Engineers for a Sustainable World, and the latest is Computer Scientists for Social Good. All of these are student organizational core partners of the Haas Center that are identifying fellowships or offering fellowships through their work in partnership with other institutions. Then we have institutional partners on campus, 29 of them, the Bill Lane Center, the Carnegie Center, Global Studies, the collection of all the area studies programs at Stanford, Freeman-Spogli Institute, Woods Institute for the Environment. The list goes on. And again, some of them have fellowship opportunities that they've established. Others of them have fellowship opportunities that they can fund when students have an idea and have identified a partner that is compelling for them. We take safety and security of paramount importance. So there are multiple ways we address this. First of all, Stanford will not fund any undergraduate research or fellowship opportunity in a country that is on the State Department travel advisory list. There's only rare exceptions to this that happen when a faculty member is taking a student group and the group is under very carefully identified restrictions and in parts of the country that are identified as being safe. I know this because I'm taking students to Israel this summer for being overseas studies, and I know what I've had to go through for that. So the first cut is risk analysis at the country level. The second cut is by looking at where they're going to be and making sure that they're going to have a safe place to live, and making sure, by the way, that their fellowship award is going to be adequate to ensure that they will be able to live in a safe place, and if they're overseas, to take safe transportation. So there have been times when we've said to students, we are adding on an increment of funding for your fellowship, say if they're going to be in sub-Saharan Africa or India or wherever, because you didn't budget for local transportation, and we don't think it's safe for you to be taking a local Mammy bus or whatever it might be. We want you to take taxis to and from work, and we're adding on an increment of funding for that. So we take this very seriously. Every student who gets a fellowship, either a research fellowship or a public service fellowship to be abroad, has to take an orientation course, an orientation program of several hours on a weekend, and if they're abroad and they can't be physically present, it's taped and they have to watch it. And really think through with us these safety and well-being issues before they can get their fellowship award.
Terrific. Larry, thank you so much for the time.
My pleasure.
Appreciate it.
Absolutely. We're going to wrap up the call now, folks. Thanks so much for participating and for your great questions. We'll be sending out the link to the recording shortly, but if you have any questions before then, feel free to email me directly. Thanks so much.